cost to having amazing weather in California is that we get to experience earthquakes. If you move here, it's kind of a rite of passage to go through your first earthquake. Luckily, those are usually on the smaller side. They're usually like a 4.0. That's the most common probably size we get is like 3.5 to 4 point something. At 4.5 or above, they kind of become real earthquakes. Like, you know, those are legit. There's good shaking, there could be some damage. But most of them are gonna be on the smaller side. But we never know. We don't know when they're gonna happen. We don't know how big they're gonna be. A lot of people, me included, think that there is such a thing as earthquake weather, but I've talked to a lot of people and we all have different definitions of what earthquake weather is, so we're obviously all wrong. For me, my first earthquake was in 1987. I was 11 years old and I was home alone, and it was a 6.1 earthquake in Whittier, California. And it was a gorgeous day. We had had a storm the day before and it blew through, and we woke up to like the most beautiful blue skies, perfect weather. I put on a cute new little outfit. I was so excited about the day, and then a giant earthquake hit. So for me, that's earthquake weather. But I've talked to somebody else who thinks rain is earthquake weather, so who knows? Hi, I'm Allesen Cann. I'm a real estate agent here in beautiful San Diego, California. Since there's no way to know when an earthquake is going to happen, let's talk about 3 ways you can prepare. The first is just to be aware of the risk. San Diego is not on the San Andreas fault. Yay! It's actually a little bit inland, kind of out in the like Palm Springs-ish area. But we have our own fault line to contend with called the Rose Canyon quake. So while we might not be getting the big one you've always heard about, which by the way, we will feel and could have damage from, but we have our own fault that can produce a good-sized earthquake. The Rose Canyon Fault actually starts up off the coast of Oceanside. It goes down the coast, it comes inland at La Jolla, and then it goes under Mount Soledad through Rose Canyon, which is its namesake. It goes down the 5, kind of like right along Mission Bay into Old Town and then Little Italy and through downtown, and then it goes back out to the coast through the Silver Strand. And then it continues on down to about Tijuana. There are a couple of places in San Diego where you can actually kind of see the fault line. The first one I went to is called Fault Line Park. It is in the East Village. And you can see here, this pathway actually runs approximately along the fault. And there are those 2 silver shiny globe things. They are lined up with each other and you can look through one of them to the other. And if there is a big earthquake and the ground moves, you'll be able to tell because they will no longer be in alignment. It's actually a pretty interesting place, although I do recommend avoiding East Village because it's pretty disgusting. There are also some lots scattered around and you'll see some buildings that are kind of like at angles and stuff like that. It's all because of the fault line. This is one lot where they can't build anything because the fault line runs directly under it. And if the building is directly on top of the fault, if that fault splits open, so does the building. So they don't want to build directly on top of it. Being next to it isn't necessarily any more dangerous than being, you know, a couple miles away or something like that. It's just the being directly on top of it because that's where the ground would definitely split open. Another place you can see it is actually if you hike to the very back baseball field at Tecolote Canyon. There's this sign that denotes where the Rose Canyon Fault goes through, and it actually tells you about how on one side there's one type of rock and on the other side there's a whole different type of rock because it's where the 2 plates are coming together. It's kind of interesting to actually know that you're standing directly on a fault line. Now this fault hasn't had a major quake since 1882, but does have the potential to create up to a 6.9 earthquake. Predictions are that there's only about an 18% chance that in the next 30 years we would see a 6.7 or greater earthquake. Of course, that doesn't mean that we're not going to see bigger, like smaller ones, but you know, we'll see what happens. Luckily, that's a lot lower than the predictions for the San Andreas Fault, where it's now 60% chance that a big one will happen on the San Andreas within the next 30 years. Interestingly, I have been hearing for the past 30 years that there was a 50% chance. So the percentage is definitely going up, and that means it's more likely. If the Rose Canyon Fault does produce a big quake, the coastal towns are the most in danger. Examples of some of the damage could be landslides on Mount Soledad and Point Loma. The Coronado Bridge will probably survive from what they say, but the roads leading to it might get really damaged, so Coronado might be cut off from the mainland. Water in those areas could definitely be damaged, and so there might not be water. And the buildings most at risk are the older buildings, especially in like, you know, the Little Italy downtown areas where there's some really older buildings. Those have not been retrofitted necessarily and are likely at the most risk. The big giant tall buildings probably going to be fairly safe because they are made to sway with the earthquake. Now, all of that leads us to the second thing to do to prepare, which is to have a plan. Since you don't know where you're going to be when an earthquake hits, make sure that the places that you spend the most time, such as home and work, you know what to do. I just talked to a friend who actually moved here a couple years ago, and he even said he doesn't know what to do in the event of an earthquake. So here's your primer. The best place to go is either in a doorway or under a piece of furniture, preferably like a large heavy piece of furniture like a dining table or a desk, something like that, and preferably away from windows or other glass. That earthquake that I told you that I was in, I got in the doorway, there was a full-length mirror on the wall next to me, kind of freaked me out. But I couldn't move to the dining table, which was very heavy because there was stuff flying through the air. You do the best you can. If you are inside, do not run outside because glass could be falling from buildings, could be flying places. You don't want to get hit with that, or if buildings are falling down, you don't want to get smushed by them. It's safer to be inside where there's structure around you. If you are outside, get away from buildings. Get away from anything that could fall on you. Like I said, if you are in one of those big, tall buildings, kind of feels a little odd when an earthquake comes through because it does just kind of roll. So if you've ever actually been in an earthquake where you've been like just in your house, that shakes, it's a different feeling. It's kind of weird, but you also kind of know that you're a little bit safer, which is nice. Finally, the third thing that you should do to prepare is to have an emergency kit. Now, you can go buy these off of Amazon or wherever, and they're all made up, and they're gonna have like kind of power bar type things in there, and they're gonna have some water, and they're gonna have probably a water purifier and those like metal blanket looking things that are for warmth, and you know, batteries and whatever else they have in there, flashlights and stuff. Or you can make them yourself, and they should have things like flashlights, batteries, water, food, canned food, especially can opener if they're not pop top. You want to have some of those blankets, like those kind, you know, those silver blankets you always see for like people who just ran a marathon or whatever. You should have maybe even a camp stove with some fuel just in case you don't have electricity or heat. And a radio is always a good idea too. I have one of those radios that's like has a crank on it, and so it can actually be a flashlight that's crank powered as well as a radio that's crank powered. That way you don't have to worry about batteries. You should also consider creating an emergency kit for your pets, because if you're stuck without electricity and water and everything, so are they. So make sure you've got some food and water for them as well, and have a plan for them also. For example, do you know where your cat carriers are? Are they easy to get to in case you have to evacuate? For me, earthquakes are fairly terrifying. I'm not known to handle them well after being in my first one when I was young and alone, but at least being prepared makes you feel like you have a little more control, because the biggest danger is that you're going to get stuck without electricity and water for, you know, days potentially. And how do you handle that? If you prepare for all of that ahead of time, you'll be in a better position to survive when and if the earthquake happens. So tell me in the comments, have you been in a big earthquake? Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if it was at all helpful, and hit the little bell and subscribe so that you get notified when I put out new content.